A millionaire woman insults a waitress at a restaurant, but she is shocked to discover who owns it. It was exactly 7:45 p.m. on a busy Friday in the heart of San Diego. The renowned Donovan's Grace restaurant, known for its classic decor, yellow, lights and refined atmosphere, was packed. Among couples celebrating anniversaries, executives discussing business, and tourists delighted by the impeccable service, one figure in particular caught the eye: Hannah Monroe. Hannah was an elegant, imposing woman with a striking presence. She wore a long red silk dress, sparkling jewelry, and heels that clicked firmly with every step she took. She was known in local high society for her inherited fortune, her extravagant parties, and, unfortunately, for her difficult temperament and air of superiority. That night, Hannah arrived accompanied by two equally well-dressed friends. The three of them sat at one of the best tables in the room, with a direct view of the illuminated garden. Smiling at each other, they looked at the other customers with a certain veiled arrogance, as if they believed they belonged to a different, more elevated, more dignified world. A few minutes later, Emily, a young waitress of about 23, approached, the table with a notepad in her hand and a gentle smile on her face. Even though she was visibly tired, she maintained the posture and politeness that she always valued. Her brown eyes seemed to carry a slight sadness, but also a hidden strength. "Good evening, ladies. Welcome to Donovan's Grace. Would you like to start with a glass of house wine, or would you prefer to see the drink menu?" Emily asked politely. Hannah looked her up and down with a critical and undisguised gaze. She paused briefly before answering, as if savoring the moment of putting someone in the place that, in her mind, she should occupy. "Don't you think you're speaking a little too loudly for a waitress?" she said in a sharp tone. Her friends let out a discreet laugh, trying to hide their mockery. Emily, a little confused, tried to maintain her composure. "I apologize, ma'am. I can speak more quietly if you prefer." Hannah arched an eyebrow, resting her elbows on the table in disdain. "It's not just that, dear. It's the way you walk, the way you talk. You know, in this kind of place, a certain level is expected, if you know what I mean." The pain of those words hit Emily deep, but she remained firm. Her smile was now more restrained, almost automatic. She wrote down Hannah and her friend's order quickly, trying not to show the discomfort she felt. Inside, the young woman fought the urge to run away and cry in secret, but there were bills to pay. There were dreams to achieve. She needed that job. Hannah turned to her friends and whispered audibly, "These places are getting more and more popular. You can't go out to dinner without being served by people who are completely unprepared." Her friends laughed again. Emily just lowered her eyes and took a deep breath, pretending not to hear. This wasn't the first time she had dealt with difficult customers, but there was something different about Hannah, a kind of gratuitous cruelty that didn't come from ignorance, but from pride. The atmosphere, which had been pleasant before, now seemed a little heavier, and although no one had said a word in Emily's defense at that moment, someone was watching everything from afar, attentive, silent, and ready to intervene. Emily walked away from Hannah's table with quick but discreet steps. Her heart was beating faster than usual. It wasn't new that she had faced situations like this, the veiled prejudice, the judgmental looks, the fake smiles. But it still hurt. And tonight the pain seemed sharper. Behind her, Hannah leaned forward, supporting herself on her elbows, a mischievous smile on her lips. She watched Emily walk away, and with a look of contempt, commented to her friends, "Have you seen the way she walks? She looks like she's about to faint. I bet she didn't even eat dinner today. She must be saving up for lunch to pay for some little college." Her friends laughed mockingly. One of them, Lucia, waved her fan lightly and replied, "Honey, Nowadays, anyone thinks they can be a doctor just because they watch motivational videos on the internet. But look, she doesn't even have the posture. Imagine what will become of education in this country with that kind of person in charge. Hannah laughed louder this time, enough to catch the attention of those at the nearby tables. Some people looked away, embarrassed, others pretended not to hear. But there was something uncomfortable about that laugh. It wasn't born of amusement, but rather of cruelty. That's exactly what worries me, Lucia. People like her want to change the world, but they can't even balance a tray, Hannah said, adjusting her pearl necklace as if her every word were a luxury to be displayed. Emily across the room pretended not to hear, but she did. Each laugh was like an invisible arrow piercing her self-confidence. Even so, she took a deep breath, forced a smile, and went back to work. She needed to stay focused. After all, she wasn't here just for a paycheck. Emily was studying nursing at a community college, and all her double shifts, sacrificed weekends, and sleepless nights had a single purpose: to graduate and help people. Her father had died 3 years ago, a victim of aggressive cancer. The image of him, fragile and at the same time hopeful until the end, was what kept her going through each difficult shift. She knew she couldn't afford to give up. Her mother depended on her, and her dream of caring for others with the compassion she wished her father had received was what gave meaning to each humiliation she swallowed, each tear she held back. At Hannah's table, the laughter continued. "It's even funny. She's like one of those soap opera girls, you know? Poor thing, hard-working, full of dreams. All she needs now is a prince," Hannah joked, raising her wine glass. Her friends laughed again, this time in a more restrained tone, as if they knew they were going too far, but not enough to stop. To them, Emily was nothing more than a secondary character in a perfect night, an insignificant detail in their luxurious routines. However, what they didn't know was that that night, the world would turn around, and the one who seemed small and invisible would soon become the center of a lesson that would be marked forever. Emily took a deep breath in the hallway behind the kitchen, trying not to let the lump in her throat spill over into her eyes. The night was still just beginning, and the restaurant was packed. Important clients, businessmen from the city, elegant couples, and at the center of it all, the table of Hannah Monroe, the most well-known name in San Diego's society columns. Grabbing a new tray with 2 glasses of wine and a small board of fine cheeses, Emily walked toward the table again. Her hands were shaking slightly, something she tried to hide at all costs. She knew Hannah and her friends were watching her. She knew that any slip would be used as ammunition. And unfortunately, fate was not kind at that moment. When she got close to the table, a waiter who was hurrying out of the kitchen lightly bumped into her shoulder. It was just a touch, almost imperceptible, but enough to unbalance the tray for a second. Emily tried to hold on, tried to steady her hands, but one of the glasses tipped over, spilling a little red wine on the edge of the tablecloth. The liquid slowly dripped down, creating a dark stain next to Hannah's plate. A sharp silence took over the table. Hannah stared at the tablecloth as if she had just witnessed a crime. Her eyes widened, and her mouth slowly opened in a dramatic gesture. "Did you spill wine on my table?" she said loudly, so that everyone around could hear. Emily, terrified, carefully placed the tray on the table and began to quickly grab the napkins to contain the wine. "I'm sorry, Mum. It was an accident. Accident? Accident?" Hannah interrupted her sarcastically. "Do you have any idea how much that tablecloth cost? This isn't a corner bar, honey. It's Maison Blanche." Her friends held back their laughter, but Lucia couldn't resist. "Maybe it's her first day." "First day or not," Hannah continued, completely ignoring Emily's attempt to clean the tablecloth. "This is an insult to good taste. I should ask to speak to the manager right now. This is unacceptable." Emily lowered her face, trying to hold back the tears. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks and shame spreading throughout her body. She couldn't defend herself. She knew it wasn't entirely her fault, but at that moment, any justification seemed like a lame excuse. "Look at that," Hannah pointed to the wine stain. "Even my plate lost its appetite. You ruined my evening. Maybe you should find another profession, one that doesn't require coordination or education." These words cut deep. And what was worse, they were said in front of several people in an almost entire room that was now whispering and looking in Emily's direction. But there was also another look. In the distance, discreetly, someone was watching. Charles Donovan, the man in the grey suit, didn't miss a second of the scene. His hands remained folded on the table, and his gaze was firm, but still calm. He didn't say anything yet. Meanwhile, Emily, trying to maintain her composure, picked up the empty glass and the stained tablecloth delicately. She didn't answer. She didn't defend herself. She just turned away, her eyes filled with tears and her heart crushed by humiliation. Hannah smiled, satisfied, and raised her new glass of wine. "Some people are just good for serving," she said before taking a small sip. But what Hannah didn't know was that that moment would be remembered for a long time, and that the lesson that would come would turn her life upside down. Emily had barely moved away from the table when Hannah let out a loud, purposeful laugh, as if she wanted everyone to hear how much fun she was having with the situation. "That's why certain places should have a hiring standard," she commented, crossing her arms and looking at her friends with a mocking smile. "If they hire just anyone just because she has a fresh face and needs a few bucks to pay for college, look what happens." One of her friends, wearing a pearl necklace and holding a glass of champagne, agreed with a laugh. "Did you see her face? She looked like she was going to cry like a little girl. So fragile. And yet she wants to work in a fancy restaurant. This is no place for amateurs." Hannah shook her head, feigning pity. "Maybe she should try something more simple. Maybe work in a diner. Paper uniform, ordering at the counter. Nothing that involves balance or finesse." The others laughed. With each laugh, more eyes turned to the noisy table. Some people glanced at each other in discomfort. Others just lowered their faces as if they didn't want to get involved. But Hannah's wicked smiles only grew wider. "Guys, for God's sake, I wasn't even mad. I'm just trying to help. Telling the truth may hurt, but it's a job. That's what's missing these days, honesty. The girl clearly isn't prepared to be here. She can barely hold a tray, let alone serve important people." A pause. Hannah then delicately lifted her napkin, wiped the corners of her mouth, and looked toward the counter, where Emily was trying to hide her red face, arranging plates on another tray. "Did you see how she cringed? It's a shame. But maybe a little public embarrassment will teach a lesson or two." The words echoed like poison in the air. It wasn't just arrogance. It was an almost cruel desire to leave a mark on someone who was already struggling to stay on her feet. Charles Donovan, still sitting at his table, observed everything attentively. His eyes slowly passed over the women's expressions, stopping for a moment on Hannah. He knew exactly the kind of person she was, accustomed to applause for her fortune, flattered by convenience, protected by the power of her family name. But now she was starting to expose herself on her own, without needing any help. On the other side, Emily took a deep breath for the 10th time. She held the new tray tightly, her fingers stiff, her heart beating faster than she would have liked. She had heard almost everything. It wasn't hard to hear. Hannah wanted her to hear, but instead of crying or running to the bathroom as she thought she would, Emily lifted her face and forced a slight smile. She couldn't, and wouldn't, let the words of an empty woman bring her down. She still didn't know what was coming that night, but something inside her was starting to change. Hannah, on the other hand, savored every second of the humiliation she believed she had caused. Little did she know that within a few minutes the tables would turn so elegantly and impressively that not even all her wealth would be able to erase what was to come. Sitting, a few tables away, a man with impeccable posture watched everything with attentive eyes. He wore a well-tailored grey suit, a white Egyptian cotton shirt, and a navy blue Italian silk tie. His grey hair was combed with precision, and the features of his face, marked by time, revealed wisdom and serenity. It was Charles Donovan, a respected name in California business circles, but at that moment he was just another client, or so it seemed. While Hannah Monroe and her friends continued to laugh loudly, spreading arrogance to every corner of the room, Charles remained silent. His fingers rested gently on the glass of red wine in front of him, but he did not drink. He observed, not with anger, but with the attention of someone who reads between the lines of a situation, of someone who understands human behavior better than he would like. He knew all too well the kind of woman Hannah represented, raised in luxury, protected by the bubble of privilege, accustomed to stepping on others to feel bigger. And unfortunately, he also knew that people like her were rarely confronted. They simply walked all over whoever got in their way, as if the world existed only to serve them. Charles's gaze, however, was more focused on the young waitress, Emily. He had noticed her dedicated posture from the moment she had entered his line of sight. Even with the dark circles under her eyes and the tired steps, there was a natural elegance about her, a gentle firmness. She was the kind of person he admired, and in this particular case, someone he knew much better than others imagined. He saw her hold back tears when she bit her lip trying to maintain her composure, and when she returned to the dining room with another tray, firmer, more determined, despite everything she had just heard. There was a strength there that not even public humiliation could erase. Charles sighed softly. It wasn't the right time yet. He knew that situations like this required the right timing to act. Sometimes, an impulsive response isn't as powerful as a precise, elegant intervention that couldn't be ignored. He would wait. He was watching Hannah, yes, but with the care of someone preparing a silent checkmate. The laughter at the table next to him was louder now. Some people in the restaurant were starting to get annoyed, exchanging discreet glances. Others just tried to ignore it. Emily, on the other side of the room, seemed focused on her task, but her eyes were still moist. Charles raised the glass to his lips for the first time. He took a small sip. Then he placed the glass on the table, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, and looked away at the restaurant manager who was hurrying by. It was almost time. Charles's silence was not an omission. It was preparation. And soon, that night that seemed to be an embarrassment for Emily would turn into an unforgettable lesson, not only for Hannah Monroe, but for all those who watched in silence that injustice. Emily's heart was in pieces, but her face tried at all costs not to show it. The mascara was beginning to smudge discreetly under her brown eyes, which avoided looking directly at any customer. She knew that if she looked into anyone's eyes, the tears might finally fall, and she didn't want to give that pleasure to those women who were still laughing loudly at the table in the corner. As she balanced another tray, this time with 2 glasses of white wine and a portion of carpaccio, Emily murmured to herself, "Focus. Just a few more hours, then you can cry at home, not here." Her hands were shaking slightly, but she forced herself to continue. The pride she felt for fighting for her own dreams, paying for her studies with the sweat of her work, was what kept her steps firm, even in the face of cruel contempt. Each night in that restaurant represented another chapter, overcome or proof that she didn't need anyone's pity. On the other side, Hannah laughed with her friends as if she were in a theater. She exaggerated her gestures, imitating Emily's little mistake as if she were a circus clown. "Did you see how she looked? That poor little expression. Oh, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost," she said, and the others laughed even harder. One of them, a blonde woman with sparkling jewelry on her wrist, commented between sips of wine, "This place used to be more exclusive. Now anyone with an apron can come in." Emily listened, every word, like a sharp knife cutting her confidence into thin slices, but she didn't stop. She pretended not to hear, even though her chest screamed silently. As she passed Hannah's table to serve another customer next to her, she heard another muffled provocation. "Be careful, my dear. Don't trip again. We've already seen that balance is not your strong point." Emily gritted her teeth, held her head high, and walked on. Internally, she clung to the words of her mother, who always said, "Daughter, dignity is not lost with offense. It is lost when we retaliate with hatred." She didn't know it, but some tables nearby were watching her in silence. Discreet customers who, although they didn't intervene, saw the injustice happening there and began to feel uneasy about Hannah's behavior. Hannah, however, felt like she owned the place. She drank, laughed, and mocked as if she were putting on a private show for her followers. The room, which had previously been overflowing with elegance, was now contaminated by an invisible poison, prejudice disguised as superiority. And in the corner of the restaurant, Charles Donovan continued to watch, impassive. He saw everything: Emily's strength in standing, the toxic pleasure with which Hannah mocked a worker, and the discreet eyes of the other customers who, although silent, were also uncomfortable. Emily passed by the kitchen again and allowed herself a small moment of weakness. She leaned against the cold white tile wall, took a deep breath, and discreetly wiped her eyes with her apron. The head chef, Donna Clara, a white-haired lady with a sweet look, stared at her for a moment but said nothing. She just nodded her head in a gesture of respect. Emily returned it with a grateful look and returned to the dining room. She knew she couldn't give up, that this night, like so many others, was just another battle, and even though her heart was hurting, she carried within her something that no Hannah could destroy: dignity. The atmosphere in the restaurant was beginning to change. There was a silent tension in the air, as if time was waiting for an outcome. With each laugh from Hannah, the atmosphere became more uncomfortable, as if all that luxury was losing its shine. Some customers were already exchanging glances among themselves, uncomfortable but still lacking the courage to interfere. Charles Donovan, still sitting at his reserved table in the corner, observed everything attentively. His eyes, hidden behind discreet, thin-rimmed glasses, reflected more than just disapproval. He seemed to weigh every gesture, every word said by Hannah, and especially the dignity with which Emily faced that humiliation. Charles was not an impulsive man. At 68 years old, a businessman with a long career and respected in the city, he believed that true power lay in the way one reacted to injustice. And there, faced with that regrettable scene, he knew he had to act, but with elegance, with intelligence. Calmly, he placed his napkin next to his plate, finished the last sip of his red wine, and stood up with the posture of someone who knows exactly what he's about to do. Dressed in an impeccable grey suit that matched his slightly greying hair, he walked with firm steps to the counter where the manager, Mr. Miguel, was reviewing some orders on the tablet. Miguel, a man in his 50s with a always friendly countenance, looked up when he saw Charles approaching and immediately straightened his posture. "Mr. Donovan, good evening. Is everything to your liking?" he asked in a respectful tone. Charles did not answer immediately. He moved closer, glanced discreetly towards Hannah's table, then at Emily, who was serving an elderly lady with a sad but still present smile. Then he spoke softly, in a tone that only Miguel could hear. "I want you to send a bottle of the best champagne in the house to that table, and with it, this envelope." Miguel frowned in surprise. "To that lady in the red dress?" "Exactly. Tell her it's a special courtesy from the owner of the restaurant." Miguel was still hesitant, but Charles finished firmly. "And when you deliver it, I want you to say it in front of everyone. Exact words. A courtesy from the owner of this restaurant." The manager nodded subtly, understanding that there was more to it than just a simple gesture of courtesy. It was a message, a lesson that was about to be given, not with shouting, not with humiliation, but with the elegance that only great men carry. Charles then handed her a white envelope, sealed, with red wax, discreet but sophisticated. Miguel took it carefully, as if it were an important document, and went to the wine cellar to get the champagne. Meanwhile, Charles calmly returned to his table. He sat down, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, and looked around the room again. Emily was passing by him at that moment, and for a second their eyes met. Charles gave her a slight smile. She didn't say a word, but in that look there was respect, there was support, and above all, there was something Emily hadn't seen in a long time. Someone on her side. She didn't quite understand. She just nodded back and went on her way. But in a few minutes, the night would take a completely unexpected turn. The restaurant, which had been filled with a murmur of conversation and clinking cutlery, fell silent almost instinctively when the manager Miguel returned to Hannah Monroe's table. In his hands was a bottle of French champagne from the house's most expensive vintage, and a white envelope that stood out for its discreet elegance. Hannah, still engrossed in laughter with her friends, looked up when she saw the manager approaching with a formal smile. Naturally, she thought it was yet another recognition of her status there. "Mrs. Monroe," Miguel said in a firm but gentle voice, "I have a special gift here." She arched an eyebrow, curious and vain at the same time. "A gift? Oh, how kind. Finally someone recognizes class in this place." Her friends laughed, but their laughter began to fade when Miguel added, "It's a courtesy from the restaurant owner." The silence fell like a curtain. Hannah blinked, confused. "What?" Miguel handed her the envelope. Everyone at the table's eyes were now fixed on that piece of paper. Hannah took it carefully and opened it slowly, as if she were in one of those movies where the villain gets his sentence. Inside was a simple letter, written in a firm handwriting. "Mrs. Monroe, I hope this drink brings you a moment of reflection. Sometimes the true flavor of life lies in humility and respect. Sincerely, Charles Donovan." When she read the name, Hannah went pale. "Charles Donovan? It can't be." It was at that moment that he stood up again from his discreet table in the corner of the room. With calm steps and a striking presence, Charles walked over to Hannah's table. All eyes were on him now, waiters, customers, even Emily, who stopped for a moment, feeling her heart beat faster without knowing why. When he arrived at the table, Hannah was already speechless. Charles looked at her for a second, and then his voice echoed in the room calmly. "Good evening, Mrs. Monroe. I hope you are enjoying your meal." She tried to regain her tone. "Mr. Donovan, I didn't know you were the owner here." He nodded. "Yes, and I am also the uncle of one of the waitresses you treated with such disdain." The impact of those words was like a lightning bolt in the room. Hannah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her friends around her swallowed hard, and the other customers stopped what they were doing. Charles then continued, looking her straight in the eyes. "Emily is my niece, and more than that, she is a hard-working, honest, and extremely dedicated young woman. She is here every day, fighting to pay for her studies, always with dignity. And today, she was treated as if she were nobody." Hannah looked away, embarrassed. The arrogance of a few minutes ago seemed to have evaporated. Now she was nothing more than a woman trying to hide from the truth. Charles did not raise his voice. He did not need to humiliate her. His presence, his calmness, and his words were more powerful than any scandal. "In this restaurant we value respect. Money can pay a bill, but it does not buy education or character." The silent audience in the room almost applauded in thought. Emily, on the other side, covered her mouth with her hands, surprised and moved by the revelation. Charles then concluded, I hope this evening will be remembered by you, not because of the taste of the wine, but because of the lesson that life sometimes offers us in the most unexpected places." And with that, he walked away, leaving Hannah completely speechless, while all eyes in the restaurant remained on her. The silence in the restaurant still echoed like a respectful ghost, while Charles Donovan stood next to Hannah's table. The woman, once confident and arrogant, now shrank in her chair like a child reprimanded before the teacher. Her eyes fled from the gazes around her, who seemed to judge her more harshly than any words could do. Charles then spoke again, with a calm but firm tone, as if he did not intend to humiliate but to teach. "You know, Mrs. Monroe, a person's true power is not in what they wear, the car they drive, or the last name they carry. It is in the way they treat others, especially those they believe have nothing to offer." The words entered Hannah's soul like fine needles. She tried to sketch a reaction, but only stammered, I didn't mean to." Charles raised his hand slightly, not in a gesture of harshness, but of restraint. "Allow me to finish." He took a deep breath and looked around. Many customers, waiters, and even cooks were discreetly paying attention, but Charles was not speaking to the audience. He was speaking to Hannah and, in part, to Emily, who was watching in the background with teary eyes. Miss Emily is young, yes, perhaps inexperienced in some aspects of life, as we all were once. But she has something that money cannot buy: character. Even in the face of your contempt, she stood her ground. She held back her tears, kept working. That, Mrs. Monroe, is true strength. Hannah lowered her eyes. The gleam of arrogance in her eyes had disappeared. Charles calmly sat down in an empty chair next to the table, as if he wanted to speak humanly now. "You humiliated her in public. You called her incompetent. You mocked the efforts of a young woman who wakes up every day at 5 in the morning to study and work, who doesn't have luxuries but has dreams. Do you really think that's inferior?" A single tear ran down Hannah's face. She quickly wiped it away, as if she didn't want to show weakness. But there, it wasn't weakness. It was perhaps the first step in a transformation. You are a woman of means. I imagine you fought to be where you are, or inherited it from someone who did. But allow me to say something as someone who has seen a lot in this life. When we forget where we came from and think we are better than others, we become small. Very small. Charles leaned forward slightly, looking into her eyes. "No one here wants to embarrass you. Not my niece, not me. But I hope from the bottom of my heart that tonight makes you reflect, that you realize how words and actions hurt, that you remember that we are all fighting invisible battles. Some with money, others with courage, but everyone deserves respect." Hannah's friends were completely silent. The air around them seemed denser, as if the restaurant was breathing in that lesson of humanity. Charles then stood up once more. "Kindness is the purest form of greatness, and it's free. You, with everything you have, can still be greater, if you decide to use it." The atmosphere in the restaurant was still permeated by a respectful stillness, as if each person present was digesting Charles Donovan's words, along with the aroma of dinner. His voice, calm and firm, still echoed like a breeze that cleansed, pride and sowed reflection. Charles had already taken a few steps when, suddenly, he turned to Hannah's table with a slight smile, not of mockery, but of someone who believed in the power of change. With elegance, he made a brief gesture for the manager to come closer again. The man, who until then had been watching from afar with admiration, came with determined steps, discreetly carrying a golden envelope in his hands. Charles reached out, took the envelope, and addressed everyone who was paying attention. "There is one more thing I would like to say, Mrs. Monroe, and to everyone present." Hannah, still downcast and visibly touched, slowly looked up. Her friends remained silent, as if they knew that this moment required respect. Charles raised the envelope slightly in the air, as if presenting something symbolic. The amount of this bill, which by the way was not modest, will be donated in its entirety to an institution here in San Diego that helps young people like Emily. Young people who, even facing difficulties, do not give up on their dreams, who work hard, study at night, face fatigue, prejudice, and still move forward with dignity. He paused briefly, allowing those words to settle in the hearts of everyone there. Casa Nova Esperanza offers free courses, psychological support, food, and most importantly, an environment where these young people are treated with respect, where they are heard, welcomed, valued. And today, thanks to tonight, this institution will receive a contribution that can change many lives. Some customers looked at each other in emotion. Others nodded silently, touched by the unexpected gesture. On the other side of the room, Emily, still with her dirty apron and moist eyes, put her hands to her mouth in shock. She knew how much this institution helped young people like her. She had volunteered there for a while. Seeing her uncle turn that painful moment into something so generous was too much for her restrained heart. Hannah swallowed hard. Her voice came out low, almost imperceptible. "I didn't know." Charles looked at her kindly, without judgment. "Now you know. And what you do with it from now on is your choice." He handed the envelope to the manager discreetly and gave Hannah a final nod. Then she walked over to Emily, placing a protective hand on her niece's shoulder, who was barely holding back her tears. The silent audience in the restaurant didn't need applause. What had happened there was greater than any gesture of applause. It was a living reminder that even moments of pain can blossom into gestures of love and transformation. The silence in the restaurant remained dense, as if the air itself respected what had just happened. Charles was already a few steps away, next to Emily, when a trembling voice broke the stillness. "Wait," Hannah said, slowly getting up from her chair. All eyes turned to her. Her friends watched her with discomfort. For the first time that night, the haughty woman everyone knew as arrogant and self-assured now seemed vulnerable. Her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes teary. Her perfect makeup was starting to fade in small trails around her eyes. I'm not that horrible person you described. It was a moment of impulsiveness. I didn't mean to." Charles turned around, maintaining his calm posture. "Didn't you want to humiliate a young worker in front of dozens of people? Didn't you want to laugh at the pain of someone who was just trying to do her job with dignity?" Hannah hesitated, her lips trembling. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. She looked around and realized that no one was looking at her with admiration anymore. There was a mix of compassion and disappointment on the faces of those present, and that hurt more than any reprimand. "I was with the girls. We had a few drinks, and I got carried away. It was just a joke. I didn't think—" "Exactly," Charles interrupted firmly, though without raising his voice. "You didn't think." He took a few steps toward her, but his tone was softer now. There was no anger, just a genuine desire to make her understand. "Hannah, we are all responsible for what we do, even when we're not thinking. Your words hurt. Your laughter belittled someone. And perhaps worse, the example you set today is the kind of example that breeds prejudice, arrogance, contempt for others." Hannah lowered her eyes, like a child who finally understands the gravity of a mistake. Charles took a deep breath and added, "But I'm not here to humiliate you. That would be repeating the same mistake. I just want you to understand that actions have consequences, and that every choice we make, even the seemingly small ones, say a lot about who we are." He looked at Emily, who remained by his side, visibly moved, but now with her posture a little straighter. "I hope you reflect honestly. There is still time to be better, to treat others with the humanity they all deserve." Hannah nodded, speechless. Her breathing was heavy. The tears flowed freely now without the vanity to hide them. "I will think about it, really." Charles gave a slight nod. "That's a start." As Charles and Emily began to walk away from Hannah's table, the room, which had been silent for a while, began to fill with soft murmurs. But they were not mean whispers, like the ones Emily had heard so many times throughout her days as a waitress. They were words of support, of affection, of recognition. An older couple, sitting near the window, stood up. The elderly woman approached Emily with a serene smile on her face. "Honey, you were very brave. Don't let yourself be shaken. You have something that woman will never be able to buy: dignity." Emily, still holding back her emotions, smiled, with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." Across the room, a young man in a simple t-shirt and with a kind look raised his glass toward her. "You represent all of us who have been humiliated in silence. Today, you were a giant." At that moment, one of the cooks appeared through the door that led to the kitchen. It was Raoul, the head chef, a firm-spoken Latin American man with a generous heart. He crossed the restaurant without hesitation and, in front of everyone, gave Emily a big hug. "You made us proud, my little girl." Emily couldn't resist and finally let the tears flow. But they were different tears, no longer of pain or shame. They were of relief, of gratitude, of strength. Meanwhile, Hannah was still standing by the table, trying to compose herself. But every attempt to adjust her dress, wipe her eyes, or lift her chin seemed futile. What she had lost there was not only prestige, but also respect. And that, unlike the jewelry she wore, could not be bought, not even with the most exclusive card in town. The friends who had previously laughed with her now looked at the floor or to the sides, visibly uncomfortable. None of them had the courage to say a word. Little by little, Hannah picked up her bag and left in hurried steps, her heels clicking on the marble with a dry sound, like an echo of her silent defeat. At the back of the restaurant, Charles watched everything with a slight smile on his face. He did not seem proud of having exposed Hannah, but relieved that he had stood up for what he believed was fair. Before leaving, he turned to Emily and said softly, "You were strong. Never forget, respect is not demanded with shouting or money. It is earned with attitudes like yours." Emily nodded, overcome with emotion. "Thank you, Uncle. I'll never forget this." The video ends with an image of Emily returning to the kitchen, now surrounded by colleagues who are giving her a standing ovation. In the corner of the screen, the following message appears: "Money can buy luxury, but never respect. May we always choose kindness." If this story touched your heart, be sure to support our work. Leave your opinion about this life lesson in the comments. Your participation is very important to us. Like the video so that this message of respect and kindness reaches more people. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to follow other moving stories like this one. Share it with someone who needs to remember that true wealth is in actions, not in the wallet.